Greetings. This is the Open Global Mind community call for Thursday, July 31st, 2025, last day of July. Tomorrow starts August. Happened awful fast.
Yep.
And next week's call will be a check-in call. Next week's call, I will be away. So I think I'm looking for, I can open the room, but I'm going to be on vacation. So I'm going to look for a volunteer who'd like to host next Thursday's
Concept.
OGM call.
Where are you going?
Italy, going to the town of Bergamo, Italy. Which is a walled city, an ancient city, and was the westernmost outpost of the Venetian Doge back in the day. So it's, if you go to Milan and then drive 45 minutes northeast, you're in Bergamo. But Milan was the enemy because the Milanese were the next empire over. And so Bergamo has there's an old city that's up high that's at a little bit of an angle like this. It's like a lozenge plateau at a little angle, and then there's a new city down below, which is really very nice. And they made it a heritage site some years ago, and as a result, there is not a stone out of place. Like the masonry is incredible. And what I've learned is that in Florence and Venice, when they started building all the fancy buildings, they would get their masons from Bergamo because the masons were so famous. So a lot of Florentine and Venetian architecture and all that owes some little debt to Bergamasque people. Who knows? So I'll be there for 10 days and then I'll come back. Cool. We are. I thought last week's call on grief was a really lovely call. We tended to focus a lot on personal experiences of grief and handling things there. And I think when I was setting up that call the first time, I thought there was a lot to talk about societal grief, about large scale grief, and how we process it well or poorly. And so I'm hoping to take us into that conversation today and see where that takes us. There's and we also crossed into trauma a bit in the last call, and I think there's sort of a couple concepts of intergenerational trauma, societal trauma, things like that. These are I think related subjects, of course. And Klaus, if you don't mind, I think one of the maybe obvious places to start here is German war guilt and grief, and the processing, the generational processing of those kinds of things, and whether or not that worked well, because what we see now is the rise of the far right in Germany and a whole bunch of strange things happening that I think the processing post-war was meant to avoid, or in some way, let's see if we can just skip creating another world war or participating in another world war. The formation of the EU was an attempt to diffuse the tensions between the countries in Europe and so forth. But do you mind just telling us what your own experience of that has been?
Well, Germany went through an incredible time. I was born in 1949, and when I was maybe 3, 4, 5 years old, my parents had a restaurant, so they both worked in the evening, and we had a TV that had I think 1 or 2 channels, and the Allies forced the Germans to broadcast these images from the concentration camps and from now. So I remember as a little boy, still in my head, how you saw people undressing, queuing up in front of a ditch, getting shot in the head, falling into a pile, people being hung up on butcher hooks. I mean, just unbelievable stuff. So I mean, that was meant to make it clear to this is what you guys did, right? So for my generation, it was like, really, you guys did this sort of thing, and you found this normal. And the surprising thing was the defensiveness of my parents' generation. to reject wanting to see this as guilt, and so it was actually really necessary for Germany to put in these laws that made it a crime to do a Hitler salute or not to repeat Nazi propaganda. And in hindsight, that was really necessary to suppress that sentiment, and to force that kind of shame onto the people in general, right? So it's a generational trauma that will be, forever a stain. And what you see today is a generation that grew up, after mine and beyond, so the millennials and younger who didn't fully get what this was. They didn't see these images. They didn't feel the rawness of. It's so hard for me to talk about of all this.
Mhm.
I mean, it's just when you see these images, right, and then you talk with people like my dad's restaurant. They had this round table. It's called the Stammtisch, where the regulars come and drink beer before they go home or in the evening. And the conversations that the way they rationalized this whole thing, was just really incredible. And so when I was listening to Yuval Harari the other day, and he is saying, what's happening in Israel right now is creating generational trauma. This will last. This will go into the history books, and create a lot of pain. That is being really expressed now. So yeah, it's there is a collective mind. There is such a thing as a collective mind, and it's tribal, I would say. Um, and you feel either pride or I mean, from the extremes, from you feel pride and belonging, or you feel shame. And it's all in the same book.
Klaus, thank you. Um, so many thoughts, so many different thoughts. There's some piece of showing the footage of the atrocities that is to anchor in the fact that this really happened, because what we're seeing is that many people will say, oh yeah, that what, the January 6th was not that was a picnic, that was like a tourists in the capital, no big deal, and rewriting history in some sense. So having some sort of documentary evidence and making people see it feels like that, but it also has backlash. It also causes a whole bunch of other forces, and I think the dynamic is really interesting. One of the interesting thoughts in my nodes in my brain is, how do you end wars well? How do we process things well? Because part of what I'm wondering is whether the different measures that were taken, including making it illegal to buy or sell Nazi paraphernalia, do the Sieg Heil or whatever else, those were made illegal, as you said. Did that suppress conversation and processing and grief, or did that help by taking that off the table entirely? I don't know what the answers are, but I think that those are calls that people made at a societal level that we're still reckoning with in some sense, right?
People were totally shell shocked about this, and I think in like my parents, like my mother, in their mind is I wasn't a decision maker. What was I supposed to do about it, and so on. So to experience this kind of collective guilt is really a trip. I mean, for me, I was studying in Paris, and there were people who hated Germans, absolutely hated them because they got traumatized during World War II. And I'm going, well, hey, what do I have to do with it? Well, you're German. And so there is this in German, it's mitgegangen, mitgefangen. You're with it. Um, and so um, I mean, my generation has this trauma, firsthand.
Hmm.
This like, my God, I can't believe we did this, and you guys did this, and you got captured in it, and your mind is still trapped in it, and you can't get out of it, and it's uh, and the harder you push them, the more defensive they get, and because the pain is so raw and so emotional. Um, it's a really amazing thing, and the tragedy is that um, you're seeing it happening all over the world right now. I
Right, right.
mean, you're traumatizing ourselves.
Thank you. That's exactly what I'm thinking. Gil, please.
Yeah. And hurt people hurt other people.
Hmm.
There's a generational transmission of the pain. My father fought in World War II, and I think to his last day, would not buy anything German. So an example of that being carried. Um, the I think of the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions in South Africa and the work being done in Canada and the multi-century generational trauma in the Balkans that you saw flare in the 1990s in the world in the wars there. Um, Jerry, what you said about rewriting history is really, very present because we're seeing a concerted effort to do that in this country right now. As a matter of policy and thuggery and bribery, in a very systematic and organized way with surprisingly little pushback and effective defense against it. So there's that. Klaus, you talked about the generational grief being cultivated, I guess, in the Middle East right now. The trauma for the Gazans is obvious. The trauma for the Israelis is more complex. But what we're seeing rising suicide rates in Israel, we're seeing more Israeli military people refusing to serve out of projection of what's going on. But the huge thing in the background is that apparently, I don't know if this is completely true, I hear this from folks, is that Israeli news media is not fully covering the war. In other words, Israeli citizens are not seeing. It's like the Germans, in a way like the Germans in World War II. The Israeli citizens are not seeing the extent of what's going on in Gaza, the implication being that if they did, there'd be more outrage than there's been. There's been considerable amount, but with very little political leverage in the political system they have there. So, at some point when that comes out, they'll be held to pay for that. Other notable thing, I didn't see this in the time. I haven't seen the Times this morning or the American papers this morning, but yesterday there was an announcement out of the UN that in addition to Britain and France and now Canada speaking about recognizing a Palestinian state, yesterday 17 countries and the Arab League and the European Union called on Hamas to disarm and to stand down from any political leadership in Palestinian territories. It was kind of stunning that the entire Arab League signed on to that. So, the game is shifting. How you unravel the grief is a real mystery, but pretty clearly not by denying it.
Yeah, yeah. There's I think we all form little models of how things work, and my own personal model is that processing grief well often relieves different kinds of pressures in our heads and our minds. And I'm wondering uh, uh, how to do that at a societal level, because we often, famously, when soldiers come back from wars, many of them, I don't know, I would love to know what the proportions are, don't want to talk about the atrocities they saw or committed. Um, and so the stories go untold, and the next generation is like, well, guess there was a war, and their idea of war is Hollywood movies, and where there's heroes and there's people go boing and whatever, or worse, games where you shoot people and then respawn and then shoot people some more and then whatever, which is a big piece of our culture today. First person shooters or other kinds of games, and those create really warped senses of what all of this is. Matthew Grady, I think, is the photographer's name, Brady, during the Civil War. Uh, Cameras were still slow, so there are no action shots of the Civil War. But he went to battlefields just after battles were ended, and famously at Antietam, they published news photos of bloated corpses in the gullies on the battlefield of Antietam. And until then, everybody thought war was kind of glorious because the way you saw war was there were battle painters. There was actually a subgenre of painting of people who would go near a battle, stand on the hill, and then paint what they heard and saw happen and conflate different scenes, heroic scenes and charges and whatever, all sort of be represented, or they would be more like a newspaper illustrator. But it was very different. You didn't see the horror. Nobody was putting it right in front of you, and and um, and that shocked everybody. People were really stunned by seeing war close up and the sheen of war, which the militaries and governments build up all the time. The fancy uniforms, the glory, the parades, all those kinds of things are a way of building up morale for for the population and the military. Sort of fell away a bunch. Kevin, you're muted. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'm back in Swannanoa. We fled from it for a couple months in Europe to get away from the trauma and sadness of the place, and I'm back. And in terms of people standing in with that, there's this sort of position that they want me to be in Swannanoa Grassroots Alliances, helping coordinate the nascent Chamber of Commerce in Swannanoa, and I'm backing away from it. And David Bilsmer's wife was similarly, in the after a disaster, you suddenly get a lot of influence when nobody knew you before. And so they asked her to be on boards and things. And she said, there's just so much sadness. She's backing away, and I am too. We're going to rent a place in Asheville. One of the things I discovered in Europe is that I want to walk to a cafe rather than live out in the country. And that it became a whole really interesting thing. And so we're going to be urban, I think, and not rural. And kids are fighting over the property, which is whatever. And I just don't want that kind of influence. And so our community, I just want to know, has been so decimated. There's no grocery store. There's maybe a little one starting. They've taken away our post office. It's
Wow.
that the people who you would expect to stand up just are backing away. It's too heavy, and so our the weakness of our community is accentuating because the folks who stepped in post disaster just can't do it anymore. And I'm too old to do it, and I am I'm 75, but somebody to whom, when I'm in a situation, power gravitates toward me. I have something that causes that to happen, and I'm just not taking it anymore. I don't want to lift up anything. I want to write, and I don't want to have, local influence that means I have to show up at meetings and then go to the city hall or the county commissioners to represent us, because, we're a low status neighborhood still, and we aren't getting our share of what, from the county, from the state, there is still this FEMA thing in some way or other, and uh, and so there's something that happens in a community where the folks who would have stood up just can't do it, and that's where our community is kind of unraveling. And I mean, I know of other people who are just not able to. There are a couple of people who are still going, but many people who were part of the relief cannot really stay for the reconstruction because it's still so devastated and the land was scoured, and our biodiversity was greatly compromised, and compromised by the Corps of Engineers repair of the river, which just scraped it and scoured it. And so so there's I'm in Swannanoa, but in a couple of weeks we're going to be back in this Airbnb and we're going to. I don't want to be sort of the rural squire in the community trying to, I can't handle it, and so many other people who were doing it can't do it. I mean, there's something around the progressive fraying of our social fabric, and it'd be interesting to see what happens with other post-disaster places like that. There's a great Marshall High Studios you should follow on Instagram. They're wonderful. They're up in Marshall, which was totally decimated, but there's the little artist collective on this island, teeny little island, that's been restoring itself and getting volunteers, and they've got enough of a thing where they're in a really smaller community. They're building resilience and repairing this great old school. And people are getting engaged with it, and you can follow what the artists are doing, but the artists are building their community, and they're trying to imagine Marshall, and they're putting in food trucks and things like that. And there's not a way that I can imagine to imagine Swannanoa. So
Wow.
that's just sad.
Um, in in Oregon, there's a family called McMenamins that I might have mentioned in a couple of OGM calls before, but they are, I think it's two brothers and a sister who years ago started buying up derelict properties. And one of the first that they bought up was the Poor Farm that had been idled. That was 15 minutes east of the airport. So Portland itself is west of the airport, a little southwest. And east of the airport, just a little ways, is this property called Edgefield. I have an Edgefield t-shirt from there. And they then converted these properties into fabulous venues. And Edgefield is thriving. It's got a hotel, two restaurants, three bars, a bowling alley, a movie theater, a spa, a vineyard, a performance venue outdoors with a stage, with a major stage and a rolling lawn that goes down to the where the stage is and all that. And the place is great. It's a concert venue and all that. I live downtown Portland, walking distance. We love walkability. And so there are 5 McMenamins properties within walking distance of our town. And then we stayed at a McMenamins property in Tacoma or Seattle a couple years ago called Anderson School. And it was an elementary school that they had taken over. They've done this a lot. And we heard the story that that neighborhood had basically been impoverished and was not doing well until they went in and refurbed the Anderson School. And suddenly, when you drive in now, there's a bunch of buildings and restaurants, and the place that corner of the whole Seattle Tacoma area is thriving, is doing fine. And I say all of this because I wish there were more McMenamin equivalents in communities all around the world that they've got a thriving business restoring places, Masonic halls, libraries. They just find stuff and then work their magic on it. And they have a lovely aesthetic. The menu is roughly the same in all their properties. They make their own beer, wine, distilled spirits, a whole bunch of stuff. Anyway, it's kind of a minor miracle. And I'm happy to talk about something positive because it's just sad to hear stories of how exhausted people get when they're trying to recover from something so major. And I feel, Kevin, I feel for you. It's your community, which you love, was just ripped.
Yeah, and David's wife and our story ripples with each other and enables other people to walk away from holding the community together. And it's just the devastation is so severe and will be there for years. You will drive by it every day on the way to where you go, and it's just being immersed in destruction is just can't deal with it. Our farm is. Grass is growing, and the river cane is growing, but it'll never be where that's where we were going to grow old. And now we've got to find a way to sell it because our kids don't want to agree. My kids can't agree on the future next to each other. So, it's, it worked for 15 years and, then it didn't. I mean, I have less to complain about than other folks, but it's just, place is too damn sad to hang on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, Klaus, please.
Yeah, what it does show really is the need to have support services in place. I mean, here in Oregon, we had these devastating fires around the 20 corridor going from Bend to Salem and to Portland. And the entire communities got wiped out. I mean, just burned down. There wasn't a single house still standing. And when you drive through today, all new homes, it's all recovered, it's clean again. And that happened because the state mobilized, a support structure that helped everybody. They got RVs to live in for a while and got assistance, to rebuild their homes in a safer place. And I think like with FEMA being so handicapped, and you have people in cabinet positions who are so inadequately prepared to deal with these kinds of emergencies and support systems that are required. And then you go, what happened to us? I mean, what happened to our psyche? That all of a sudden we are walking away from people in need and don't really try. It's this idea that just let them swim on their own, swim or sink kind of mentality. But that's what Kevin is saying. I mean, there is outside help required for people who come in from a safe space and engage. And if that's missing, then we're in for a really bad time, because these storm systems and devastations are not going to subside, right? I mean, we're just moving into climate change. It's just pure luck if we don't get hit by a major storm this year. And then what's going to happen? Who is even mentally prepared to deal with this in this administrative leadership group there? And not just the administration. I mean, when you think the philosophy behind it, the Heritage Foundation, the Project 2025, I mean, all these ideas are so alien to a modern society, in an empathic society. It's really confounding to see where we're going here.
So thanks for bringing into the conversation the thing that lurks through many of our calls here, which is the pending worst disasters of climate change and other things, but really how climate change is going to keep doing this, and it's just going to do this more and more at a scale where human intervention seems puny, ineffectual, whatever else. And I think it's going to be demoralizing. It's going to be overwhelming. And I'm still thinking that the positive processing of grief might help a bit in this, might help get us back together, might help build up our ability to build new. I don't know. And I think I might be just being overly optimistic here, but I'm interested in the role grief has in these kinds of things. Eric, please.
Yeah, hi. So the way I can relate to historical events like World War II is through movies, and I posted a few movie references, but what I just realized is for my generation, Gen X, 9/11, 2001 was the event that most connected my generation with devastation and grief. And I worked in New York, and I took the trains, PATH trains, and saw the wreckage. And Now, what I'm wondering is that was almost 25 years ago, and that probably woke up a lot of us to the threats of what we hold dear being destroyed. But now we're seeing more destruction, and I think there's something very different now about what we're seeing than, like, it's almost like we could put 9/11 on the shelf. That's what it feels like, that even though we felt it at the time, it's like right now there's something more immediate and hurting that in these recent tragedies. And I mean, now there was a movie called Worth about how to compensate families of 9/11 victims, and that's very thought-provoking, but it's still an economic perspective from a lawyer who had to do this. But yeah, what is worth of human life these days? And yeah, how do we as humans cope with tragedies? I mean, there's always an outpouring at the beginning of donations, and then there's all kinds of scams you got to watch out for. So I think a lot of people can disconnect from helping or limit helping. And I know that's a tendency in me to step back and other than, but eventually, like, I may be in a meeting where somebody recommends a charity that's doing more specific work in a specific region, and then I would donate to that. So, yeah, there's okay, I think we can learn from some of these movies, like Forgiving Dr. Mengele, and the others that I recommended. The recent one was The Zone of Interest, realizing that any of us could have become Nazis if we were in that environment. It's a psychological thing in human nature. So let's understand ourselves, our humanity, and our fellow human, the humanity in our fellows, and be there for each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Can you just talk a little bit more? When you said we seem to have put, or we put 9/11 on the shelf, can you say more what you mean by that and what effect it had?
Okay, I think it is a distant memory in a lot of people who weren't immediately impacted by it. And I have a feeling that it's not being taught in schools or as much as it was in the past. So I have a feeling that the young generation is not sensing that the immediate devastation and what it did for us as a country, the real hit it took. Because yeah, so like there's reactions to events around the world, but still a lot of Americans still feel safe somewhat, except for these random acts of violence that we experience.
Stochastic violence or stochastic terrorism or whatever we call it. It's funny though, because 9/11 was a highly focused, brief incident of violence that took 3,000 some lives. In relation to that, the fentanyl epidemic and other sorts of things have taken enormous lives, and every day claim a whole series of lives that we don't sort of grieve or pay attention to, or else there's like other kinds of horrible events happening that we're, in some sense, there's enough bad stuff happening, and its availability to us on an instant basis because of the superconductivity of the internet and the availability and everybody carrying a high definition camera, et cetera, et cetera. We are suddenly immersed in things that ought to be causing us to grieve more, and yet an over supply of all these negative stimuli, I think, inures us to pain and suffering. And we, you know, the first couple ads when Sally Fields was on with crying children asking people to donate to save the children, those are probably pretty effective. And all of that wears off over time because we wear out over time. We can't stay in, well, I think we can't stay in grief for very long, or we're not processing grief well. We don't actually face it really well. The backlash right now, the rewriting of history we were just talking about, is going to inflict trauma on a whole bunch of people who thought things were getting a little bit better because their stories were being told, their ancestor stories were being told. That's all been shoved back in the closet now, and I, I'm really interested in processes that make things better. Any other thoughts on societal, large-scale, collective grief, its effects, uh, where we've come from, all that?
I mean, it's everywhere. I've been traveled to Chile and Argentina last year, and with Rhodes Scholar, and they always invite really interesting speakers, mostly academics. And Chile still is traumatized today by Pinochet and what happened during this time. I mean, it's amazing. Every conversation, where it got a little bit deeper, and when you go with Rhodes Scholar, this is always a little bit more intellectual and boy, I mean, every single one of the docents was like right here, with Pinochet, what happened, and the disappear, and in Argentina, the disappearance of so many, and the grieving mothers are still circling. I mean, it's everywhere. This is just there was a time of hope, I think, in our generation. The hippie era, the 70s and 60s, 70s, and so on. No more war, and even so, it was more like a fantasy, but there was at least this idea, that we can create a better world. But we haven't really succeeded. And when you look around the world, it seems to be deeply embedded in our nature, to not just on an individual level, but this collective trauma that we're causing, and that we just can't find leadership that is empathic and caring, and it seems to be so deeply embedded in our nature, that we just accumulate and want and use violence and this kind of reckless lack of empathy that is prevalent in a significant share of the population.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, are you done?
Yeah.
I grew up partly in Buenos Aires, Argentina, when I was 11 and 12, which was a while ago. And we left basically just before the Dirty War started. And the whole situation on the ground in Argentina was just spiraling downward quickly. A couple months before we left, 5 guys with guns held us up at home, ushered us to the basement, ransacked the house, stole a lot of stuff. Turns out they robbed 5 houses that evening, including the next door neighbors. There's a whole long story about it. But then I went back to Argentina right out of grad school, fresh with a fresh MBA. The first little project I had was in Buenos Aires, working for Russell Akoff, one of the founders of systems thinking. He needed somebody who understood his ideas, spoke Spanish, and had a little time available. And I had exactly a little window before I started my real first job. And I went down and loved my time in Argentina then. And just before leaving, the people gave me a copy of a book titled Nunca Más, which means never again. And it was basically the report of the Commission on Disappeared Persons, which had been published widely across the country. And Argentina is famous for their truth and reconciliation process post-Dirty War, where people who had tortured and killed people got some degree of amnesty in exchange for telling all the truth. Like if they discovered that you had told a partial truth, and then you could still be convicted for things you didn't confess to. But if you confess to things, you would be treated very differently. And so there was a purgative moment of accepting that these things had happened. And then later, as DNA evidence came in, all of a sudden they started discovering that a lot of the kids born from women who were kidnapped and disappeared had been placed with conservative families. And the DNA testing now allowed people to discover their grandchildren and meet again and figure out, oh my God, you were doing what? Which is happening right now with Ukrainian children in Russia, by the by. Exactly the same pattern. And all of this was healing, and yet I'm never quite sure when the healing is done, what works. I had a conversation with a friend in South Africa a few years back, and he was like, yeah, we talk about the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, but the situation, there's practical apartheid in South Africa to this day. It hasn't worked well. It didn't solve problems here. And I'm troubled by all these dynamics. Is this too sad a topic? Do we want to not dip into it? How do we cope? I'm very aware of and sympathetic to the overwhelm of bad news that we are living in today. And Ken subscribes to one or more good news services. I think if you want to post links to them in the chat, please do. There's ways of shifting your gaze, shifting your attention. There's also ways of just working in the world where what you work toward is positive change with anybody who will show up, which I think is a fabulous way of working. But I fear that ignoring the grief. Sorry, I'm going to go personal again for a sec. One of the errors my parents and grandparents made was not telling me the difficult stories of our family history. They never shared them. They all wanted me to be happy and have a happy life and a happy childhood. And when I was old enough to bear the weight of some of the stories, a big mistake I made with my maternal grandparents in particular, who I adored and who adored me, was not to sit them down and say, okay, guys, I'm old enough, I can take it. Tell me everything, and turn on a recorder and record all of that, because it's gone now. All my ancestors have passed away, and I'm doing detective work to try to figure out what those stories were, but it's not nearly the same as actually hearing it firsthand. And I have a suspicion that hearing these things firsthand would have caused me to make different decisions earlier in life, because I would have understood better the weight of history and actions and my family's role and all those kinds of things. Eric, please.
So I want to share a tradition that Jews use for coping, and it's really embedded. The grief is embedded throughout the whole life cycle. That, like, even in happy occasions, there's always some bittersweet memories that are acknowledged. And we're coming up on a holiday called Tisha B'Av, which is this weekend. And that's a fast day when Jews remember the destructions of the temples and all the coincidental events that happened on that day since those times, the tragic days. And so even in happy music, there's never a perfect happiness. There's always a sense of oi in everything. And I think that if that could be a model of always acknowledging the grief while throughout the life cycle, because baby's born, but there's also funerals, and it's that wholeness, that this is a whole living life fully. Now, I also think that forgiveness is a very powerful thing when it's used properly. I mean, that movie Forgiving Dr. Mengele is about a twin who was used by Nazi experiments, and her sister was totally destroyed. Her health was totally destroyed from it, but she drew strength from her experience and went on to build a museum in Indiana. And that museum was destroyed in a fire, but she had it rebuilt, and she dedicated her life to teaching about the Holocaust. So I think we need more examples of what good can come out of tragedy. That needs to be elevated more in the public consciousness, and people need to know they're not alone in whatever their grief they're going through at the time. It's got to be part of the just growing up experience. So, but that's just where I am now. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. People need to be heard. They need to feel like they've been heard. And if they aren't, then things fester. It's not good. It doesn't end up well. Where do y'all want to take this topic, if anywhere? We can shift topics. We have a bunch of time left on this call. I'm noticing we're stiller than usual, and I'm not quite sure why. If you want to just check in with where this topic is taking you, Stacy.
Yeah. This is, excuse me, this is really hard for me to say, especially because I'm the only woman on this call. But I want to share that I'm really, God, I'm moved by so much of what was said, but particularly what's sticking with me is what Klaus mentioned about the denial piece. And I mean, so much, actually, so I wouldn't call it grieving because I'm caught in that acceptance stage, but something that is being ignored is, and I'm trying to figure out a way to make it light. So I'm calling it mononucleosis, which is the killing disease. But because of what was said about denial and not wanting to look at things, I think we need to recognize that more than 80% of violent crimes are perpetrated by men. And I think we need to look more deeply into that. So I'm kind of upset because recently I've been listening to a woman who was trafficked as a child. And it's really important to hear those stories. And yes, but what I am really wanting to turn the telescope on, to use Doug's phrase, is where do these young boys that wind up going into these networks of people, where are they coming from? And I'm really believing that a lot of what we're seeing, whether it be in government or whatever, a lot of it is blackmail based, people being put in compromising positions that may not have been willing to cross a line, but it looks as if they did. And so they can be blackmailed in that way. I want to just go back to the culture and the idea that where it starts, because I'm not saying everybody's bad. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is there's something in our system that allows for structures. I was married to somebody and he used to joke that he fights, he would joke, we would have very rough arguments. And those of you that know me well can probably imagine that I can be pretty fierce. But he would joke about it and he would say, I fight to win. Now to him, fighting to win, he killed our family. I did not kill our family. I escaped our family. And there's a difference. Not once did I call him fat, bald, and ugly, which by all accounts, he probably is. I just had to say that, sorry. I've held it in forever. No.
You have to process these things. Yeah.
Yes. Well, that's where the communication comes in. I think that's where I'm centered right now. I'm trying to figure out, what do I do with this grief that I have? And I know there's something called 3 C's, which is choose, connect, and communicate. For me, I know I need to be communicating more, and that is probably going to be through writing. But to go back to my original point, if we don't look at, it could be something simple, like how many men have covered for their friends when their friends have been having an affair? How many? One of my earliest memories was this boy. He was probably about 9, because I was probably about 5, and he was collecting frogs in a jar. And he used to call himself the doctor. He wanted to be a doctor when he was older. And he was collecting these frogs in the jar so that he could suffocate them. And he was hanging out with my cousins. And I remember crying and begging them to please let the frogs go. And I remember going to my grandfather. I don't remember what everybody said. Maybe one person weakly said, just let them go. But why didn't everyone look at that boy and say, what the hell is wrong with you? And I guess that's what I'm calling for. I'm calling for men to really protect women. And the way a man really protects women is to speak out against injustice in their own circles. And I know you guys are not the ones that need to hear this message. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it, though. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. But you guys are where it starts, and then it filters out. I was listening to 2 right-wing podcasters, Vinny and Adam. And Vinny, to his credit, even though to his credit, he's like, with this Epstein thing, he's saying, I don't care if our government falls apart. I don't care. Yes, lock them all up. But the other guy, Adam, is saying, well, do you really want that to happen? And that kind of mentality that is willing to overlook children being abused like this, let's look at who these abusers are, because I think the scary part is we're going to find out that they're all over, and they're like, we may not be looking at them like abusers, but every time you cover for somebody doing the wrong thing, every time you laugh at something instead of saying, what, do you really believe that? You're part of that system, and me too. So when I say, all of us. So thank you. I know I just rambled a lot, but we have to look at this power dynamic that's built into our institutions. And that's the last point. Even like we find out, like a teacher doing something wrong, that school is looking to protect their image. So we also need to look at the way institutions are protecting perpetrators. Families protect perpetrators. I've had women tell me about, luckily I've never been abused, thank God. With all the craziness in my family, I was always loved and protected. But I've had one man too talk to me about how they were abused by somebody in their own family and told to keep quiet because it'll destroy the family. So, to get to what Kevin was saying about people not wanting to be in that heaviness, I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty. I've tried to stay away from this topic for a really long time. It's hard and it's heavy. It's easier when you do it in a group. I'll stop now. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. I appreciate your directing our attention to the fact that men commit most of the acts of violence. I think that to be true. There's an underlying question sort of flowing next to our conversation, which is about nature or nurture. I have some friends who are like, you can't change human nature. This is just the way things are. And I'm more of the, Wow, our culture and our society and how we socialize people affects people's beliefs and behaviors so deeply that we can turn into very different humans, really different kinds of humans. I don't think that human nature is, life is nasty, brutish, and short. The other people are always the enemy. We're very tribal, so we always hate the enemy. I don't think those things are true. I think those things are cultural and social. And that's only my perspective on it. But I think these questions and our internal answers to them dictate a lot how we respond to these situations, what we do, whether we feel any sense of agency. If it's just human nature is your answer, you don't have a lot of agency there. You resign yourself to the fact that these things are just going to happen over and over again. If you look at the historical record, that's kind of true. There's been lots of violence, much of it unnecessary over the years, and there's likely to be more, especially the era that we're marching into. Gil, please.
Gil,
Sorry,
can I just say
Stacy, go ahead.
just real quick, because I think that if we look at the violence against nature, that's a great starting point. And I'm even thinking about the first time a little kid sees a bunch of ants on the ground. There are some people that are going to encourage their kid, oh, kill them. And there are others that are going to look at them with wonder. And I think that if we start there and just bring the questions to the surface, maybe things would be different. Over.
Thanks, Stacy. Gil.
You're muted, Gil.
Yep. What you just said, Stacy, reminded me of the amazing Susan Griffin book, the title of which I'm blanking on.
Circle of Stones.
Huh?
Circle of Stones, I think.
No, it's subtitled The Roaring Inside Her.
Mm.
Whatever
The
that
woman and nature, the roaring
Woman and
inside
Nature.
her.
Yeah, which speaks to what Stacy was saying. It's, there's a lot of hatred for women in Magaland in the midst of the general cruelty that's playing out there. And I think Susan draws the connection of violence against nature and violence against women as generative source there. So anyhow, just the last minute thought. The human nature conversation I find really troubling and simplistic. My view of human nature is that it's vast and diverse and contains all possibilities. And that's certainly the argument that Graeber and Wengrow make in The Dawn of Everything. And we have people who will murder their neighbors without blinking an eye, and we have people who will run into a burning building to rescue strangers.
Mm-hmm.
And both of those are human nature. And the question is, what do we cultivate, and how do we cultivate it? To the assertion that the majority of violence comes from men, I would add to that it seems to come from young men. And one of the speculations about the substantial decline in murder rates and other crime in the United States over the last 20 years has been because of a demographic shift of reducing numbers of young men. So to make of that what you will, I don't know what we do with that. But what I really wanted to respond to was Stacy's comment about the role of all of us. And I've seen a number of posts lately that talk about our individual agency and lack thereof. Of how many times have any of us heard a misogynistic or racist joke and either laughed or suppressed a laugh or turned away, but not confronted or stepped into the conversation, say, wait a minute, especially if it's a friend, acting out of the habits that they've learned over years, maybe not even thoughtfully. There's opportunities for that kind of intervention all the time, everywhere, of stepping and saying, oh, that's not okay. What you just said is not okay. And that obviously doesn't change the vast political landscape, but it's one of the places where we start and where we are with what we have.
Scott. Yes, you.
Yeah, howdy.
Howdy.
So with my universals framework of frameworks, you're talking about agency, the loss of agency. And one of the themes I came to, it's a phrase I've actually put on the top card in my little deck. What can I do? And what's interesting, what I love about this phrase is it can be, what can I do? It's a total surrender. What can I do? can also be, what can I do? It's exactly the same phrase. And that's a call to agency and to taking action, to standing up, to saying what you should say, what you know you should say, what you could say, all of that. And as just a reflection on that, one of the things that kicked this off for me in 2019 was looking up the Google Ngram, which is the history or the frequency of word use inside of all the books that have been scanned over the last, I don't know, 100 plus years, goes back to 1800. And the word I looked up was helpless. And the graph was kind of like this, and then it hit 2000. And the frequency of the word helpless did a hockey stick basically at the end. And you can try it today. And the other word to put in counter to that was agency, and it had exactly the opposite shape. It's going along, it hit 2000, and boom, down it went. And I think it's interesting to me because I think books follow, like a dictionary. It follows the language. Books follow the culture. I think more so than lead. Um, and they're just kind of the wake in the water, right? And I think that's an interesting trend. So it's hard to tell, Gil, on the chart because it's 1800 to current, so it's like at
You might
some
be
point
able,
around the 2000s. Yes.
might be able to adjust the time range on it. Why I'm asking is because I suspect, don't know if this is true, but I suspect that the plummet comes after the 9/11 attacks.
That's a very interesting insight. I don't know, but I would suspect that was one of the factors.
Yeah. I mean, that certainly shook everybody's world up suddenly and big time.
By everybody, I assume you mean Americans. I mean, I think everybody was like, "Oh gosh, you can weaponize aircraft." Yes,
Well,
but
everybody in different
it
ways.
was
Americans big time.
it was a symbolic act against Americans with a very narrow geographic focus. I mean, it was like
But it
a
changed. But it changed.
pinpoint.
Changed air travel around the world. So everybody had that there. Certainly in the in the jihadist community, it had a profound effect as well.
It started to tip up actually in 1995,
Okay.
and then it did, but it is an interesting thing. I highly recommend just
If you can add the link to that ngram, yeah, perfect. Thank you. Perfect.
yeah, and then I'll just as a counterpoint, I'll do agency. And it was just something that I realized because as I've talked, shared some of the things that I've been thinking about over the years here, my focus has been on the individual because I feel like it's something I actually can have some effect over. And I think, if you tell two friends and they tell two friends and so on, you end up with an effect that at least you might be able to see locally or within your local group. So that's enough for me.
Thank you, Scott. Stacy.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I just want to add about that, about 9/11, the piece of it where it served as a wake-up call for so many people. Because I had so many friends that shifted their focus from what success meant and driving into the city and like their careers. And they just changed their lives around to be simpler. They developed their relationships with family and friends, got closer. So I just don't, I want to include that piece of a tragedy as well and coming back from it.
One of just going back to 9/11, I remember feeling like the day after 9/11, there were articles about how people on the New York subway system were looking at each other differently, about how there was a certain tenderness and vulnerability in the air, which was sad but magical, but different somehow, because New Yorkers tend to be brusque and it's like, yeah, they walk past each other trying sort of to maintain their own bubble and not get involved in whatever. And I was hoping that George W. Bush's message to the nation was going to be, hey, New Yorkers, that feeling you've been having when you see each other on the street or sit on the subway, can you help us all understand what it is? And can we tap into that? And can we take that somewhere positive to figure out, to go into and through this experience of grief together? And I think that might have been an opening door that was positive. And instead, his message was go shopping, famously. Famously, he said, go shopping. If the economy falters, we're all in trouble. So don't worry. Shopping malls are safe. Just go spend money like you always do, and think everything will be okay. And I hated that. And by the way, separate short story, Bush Sr. was on duty when the Berlin Wall falls. And there's this magical moment when the Berlin Wall falls that's very similar. It's a pivotal moment in Western human history. Everybody's sort of looking at that going, oh my God, this artifact that has been dividing the world for years and years is now melted. We could have done something very similar at that moment and processed sort of grief and expectations and other sorts of things together, and we didn't. So I think that never waste a good crisis is a horrible thing to say right now, but we have wasted these moments of crisis and change in ways that have not helped civilization and have kind of managed to divide us more and more over time.
What did Bush Sr. say at that time? You're going to say something about that?
I don't have a quote for Bush Sr. at the time. I just know that there was a leadership moment that he just missed.
Yeah.
And he was busy trying to figure out, the power dynamics have now shifted. How do we get whatever intelligence is available? How do we rearrange our partnerships and our strategic alliances? All those kinds of things would have been probably primary. But for me, there was in these major surprising incidents, although I won't say unexpected because 9/11, some people were shouting at us, this is going to happen. Like it was not completely unexpected, but certainly black swanish, right? But in these moments, there's really seeds for large scale mental shifts that we're not taking advantage of, bad phrase, that we're not making use of. I'm not sure exactly how to say this nicely. And I have a feeling that more enlightened leadership would be able to shift our perspectives more rapidly toward healthier ways of seeing. And Stacy, I think one of the things that's happened about men's behavior is we've lost notions of men as guardians or stewards, and now masculinity, as you can see from the MAGA male kind of stereotypes and the manosphere and all of that, has gone like off the rails in some other complete direction. And there's a lot of young men who don't have role models and don't know what to do. And there's a system built to catch them and groom them in, I think, relatively dysfunctional notions of what it means to be a man in the world. And then we wonder when all these other things kind of spike up later on. Scott, please.
I think I wasn't sure this was going to apply to this topic. I was at a funeral over the weekend. Well, yeah, over the weekend. And that's a very individual, personal thing, but it's also common across all of us. And what was fascinating to me was all the conversations beforehand about some of these dynamics that were behind the scene. Oh, this person broke up with this person, and I'm not going to talk to them because they spurned them, and et cetera, et cetera. And being confronted with the finality of everything and seeing it, our own, ultimately our own destiny, it changed them. And they all purposely went out and found each other and had the conversations, brief as they were, at the funeral to smooth it over and say, you know what, life's too short. I don't want to hold a grudge against you anymore. And it was really remarkable to see, because again, on an individual level, it happened. And how do you build that into a more collective societal thing where we realize that it's us, it's all us, it's always us, It's not us and them, right?
Thank you. Let's sit in silence for a little bit with this and see where we go for the last little stretch of our call. I'll bring us back up. Thank you. Hank, what's in? Oh, sorry, Stacy, go ahead.
Just real quick, I just want to encourage the use of the word grooming that you just used when speaking about young MAGA boys. I think we should speak about them in terms of being groomed for a couple of reasons. I just think that's a perfect word.
Mhm. If you look at the system that's kind of been set up and how well it has worked, it fits, the word fits reasonably well.
Yeah. Well, and the other nice piece of it, because you mentioned forgiveness, is that it can help to see the victimization of them as well and could aid in the forgiveness piece.
Nicely put. Thank you. Hank, I was just going to check in with you and ask you where your heart is on this.
Well, I missed last week's call, which was more about personal grief. So I'm thinking now there's a very strong connection in me between personal grief and societal grief. In the period between Trump getting elected and the first month or two of his reign as empire of idiocy in America, I felt that my own youth and my own innocence was being ripped away from me. My feeling that I have had for give and take most of my 77 years, that people are generally good and governments too, and if left to their own devices, they'll tend to do the right thing. And I know intellectually that history shows many examples of when that isn't true. But I also know that history does show examples of when it is true. So moving my own loss and my grieving through the 5 stages of the Kubler-Ross model, it took me about 4 months to reach acceptance, and thinking about what acceptance might mean for me and for people like us who probably can't change the cycle that we're in. These things happen in cycles, and we seem to be in a cycle moving towards, well, towards bad things in society. But maybe we can, by accepting that it's going to happen, perhaps shift some of the consequences, because the consequences haven't happened yet. They happen day by day. The futures appear and unfold day by day. So I was wondering during the first parts of this call are those 5 stages of Kubler-Ross, are they true for societies as well? And if they're true for societies as well, what happens in societies after acceptance? What does acceptance of bad things, of walking away from people in need of help, from looking away at what's happening with climate and all the evils done to women and Black lives which don't end up to matter for most white people, and it forms a kind of inner climate of society. But can that inner climate of society be shaped or shifted by people like us, by a small group of people who feel that it's important to accept what's happening but change what's going to happen? Don't know if I've really made myself clear on that. And I put this into the chat as well, and it's a question I have. I don't have an answer. But what did the Japanese do after Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Far bigger shock than 9/11. So that's where I'm at the moment.
Thank you, Hank. Thank you very much. I have a tiny bit of perspective on how Japan responded to this, which is, and which ought to be fact checked. Japan apparently does not teach Japan's role in World War II to students. Japan does not have Stolpersteine or museums dedicated. I mean, there's the Hiroshima monument of, hey, look, we were devastated by a bomb, but they did not engage in war guilt, other kinds of things. The responses of Japan and Germany, I think, are, maybe this is the wrong to set it this way, almost diametrically opposite to their role in World War II and what to do about it. Both countries were demilitarized as much as possible, and right now, because of China's possible violence against Taiwan, because of a bunch of different things, and certainly because of the war in Ukraine, right now we're seeing the remilitarization of both countries. In particular, Germany is jumping right in because somebody's got to lead and help Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. And also the belief that, you know, after Ukraine or Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, et cetera, just this could go for quite a while if it's allowed to keep going. Anyway, so again, I come back to what are the best ways, what are the most useful ways to process hugely difficult experiences at a collective level? What do you ask people to do? What do you make people do? How do you frame those moments? And if after this call, if any of you bump into essays, thoughts, whatever, put them on the list, share them back in, because we've got this might show up later. Stacy.
Yeah, you're reminding me of restorative justice, where the criminal needs to listen to the words of the people that they've hurt. And Klaus mentioned how the Allies forced those visions to be on TV. You know, people don't want to look at the bad stuff, the ugly stuff, or their own behavior. So I think there's something in it to have to listen to these stories. Maybe in the safety of a group where nobody's being singled out, but that's so important. And that's why it's just so egregious that what schools are trying, you know, what they're trying to do to schools and take away all these stories. Over.
Thanks, Stacey. Restorative justice and truth and reconciliation are in my brain under many different categories, but they're under design from trust, which is the thing I've been chewing on for a couple decades now. And the idea that truth and reconciliation is, you tell us the truth, you confess to the thing that you did, and we have a different sense of justice and balance. And in exchange for the truth, as best we can figure it out, that's valuable to society and will help us heal, et cetera, et cetera. And I think like Truth and Reconciliation in Argentina, I think worked pretty well. I think that's, Gil is asking in the chat, where do we think there have been successes? I think there are successes. I think there's some places where post-conflict good things happened. There are some places I would love to know more about, like Moorish Spain. The caliphate in Spain that came in from Africa and basically took over Africa for a couple hundred years and then got kicked out by the Catholics and the Berbers from the south. There was tremendous cooperation and academic work and poetry in Moorish Spain. And there's a large Spanish city called Matamoros. And if you decompose it, it means kill the Moors. The name of the city is Kill Moors. Moors being those Arabs. 1,500 years. Gosh, I forgot that it was that long. Sorry about that. Thanks, Ken. But for me, I would love to know more about what worked really well in Moorish Spain. I'm very interested in historic periods where there was convivencia, this whole idea of, hey, we don't care. I just read, and I'll post a guest essay. A friend has a Substack called Jigsaw Puzzle, Global Jigsaw it's called, and she's really smart, and she has a couple of people write guest posts, and one was just posted about India. And it was a real cultural sort of peek into how India has so many languages, so many cultures, and yet seems to sort of muddle through and get along. Not that there hasn't been violence, that there's been like large scale violence, but it was a really nice look into collaboration. And also there was another post about the Jewish Silk Road. Let me find those and post them to the chat before I forget them. But go ahead, Gil.
Yeah. Designed from trust, Jerry, thanks for raising that. It's also designed for the possibility of trust, isn't it?
Yes, that's in fact what yeah.
Yeah,
That's what it's meant. That's what it's meant to do. It's not foisting trust, forcing people to trust. It's like, hey, if you did this, you might trust each other more.
And the example that's in my mind lately, we may have mentioned this last week, is around medical malpractice. Hospital systems that have given agency to their doctors rather than their attorneys have found that when the doctors apologize for bad stuff that happens sometimes, apologize to the families, medical malpractice suits plummet. People recognize that, this is imperfect, mistakes happen, they appreciate the consideration, and they grieve, and they forgive, and they don't sue when there's a direct communication and apology rather than lawyers saying, oh no, you can't say that. And we all have little lawyers inside our heads, don't we?
Apparently they were installed early.
Yeah.
You'll do you think that relates to troll behavior online, where people are able to say things online that they wouldn't say to people's faces?
For sure.
And then in the same way, yeah. So that if you get the two
distant and anonymous.
So if you get the two people together apologizing or saying what they need to say, instead of intermediaries who have their own agendas.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, or actually listening to each other and inquiring about what each other cares about. And maybe it needs to be helped and facilitated by people who are skillful at that, because we don't all know how to do that. But in my few experiences of reaching across the gulf around that sort of thing, I find remarkable openings. And I find also, not a lot on the internet, because I curate my followers pretty tightly. But I had somebody yesterday who I've had some reasonable conversations with, and something came up around Israel and Gaza. And instead of having a discussion about where we disagree or have different interpretations, he just started yelling at me like, you're complicit. I thought, interesting. Like, you see like 5% of my posts. You've never talked with me. You don't know the conversations that I have in my life with real people. But it's easy for you to like, throw an aspersion at me. And I haven't responded. I'm kind of wondering how to respond in a way that's productive. And I think I'm going to ask, like, what's your objective? in your communication with me? Are you trying to change my mind? Are you trying to, you're certainly not trying to design from trust, but like, what are you looking for here? Because just calling names doesn't advance anything that you, this other person, actually care about. So like, what's up? But yeah, I think there's the anonymity of it. There's some interesting stuff I've seen in the last few days. I'll see if I can find the links to it, talking about the breakdown in human communication in the age of the internet. I've seen it very directly in I think particularly younger people, but I'm told it's more broad of people who are not curious, who don't know how to ask questions or have conversations. Um, um, there's I got to find this. Maybe this is in the Times in the last few days about people younger than us having less and less social life because so much of their life is mediated through the electrons. And so being with people in relationships of depth seems to, according to some people, seems to be weakening. Don't know. It's certainly, I think, not what we expected when these things suddenly appeared in our lives.
That's right. And I still don't have my flying car.
No, it's coming.
Or my jetpack.
Yeah, yeah. Although when you see people on jetpacks, you're like, I'm not so sure I'd be up for doing that.
Looked pretty cool when John Robinson was doing it, though.
those, those trips end fast and sharp. Um, any concluding thoughts? We're near at the end of our time. I take it we might be tuckered out on this topic. I think that we've raised a couple interesting questions that might make future topics, but any concluding thoughts?
It's a tough and deep topic, Jerry. It's like, it's not something we can resolve quickly. It opens things and then ripples go deep, and we might want to revisit it, in 2 or 3 or 6 months or something, or whenever it comes up.
Cool. I thought I heard Ken's voice.
Yeah.
I've been trying to find something that crystallized that I could say. It's been difficult because it's been a very fast conversation, actually. I would have liked more stillness. I'll just tell a story that Jack Kornfield used to tell about at the end of the Vietnam War. There's a very famous Buddhist monk who was going to do a healing ceremony, and there were tens of thousands of people who'd been displaced and lost family members and who were wounded and maimed, and they were all gathered, and they're like, what's this guy going to do? And he came out and he began to chant. It's an old Buddhist chant. It says, hatred never ceases from hatred, but by love alone is healed. This is an ancient and eternal law. And he just kept chanting that over and over and over. And pretty soon, everybody in the place was weeping because they realized they had so much hate. They had so much anger. They had so much rage at what had occurred. And in listening to this, to realize that that's not going to do anything except make it worse. It reminds me of James Baldwin's quote that, the reason most people hang on to their hatred so closely is they realize once they let go of them, they'll have to deal with their pain. And I think people in general in our culture, weird cultures, are very pain averse. They don't want to look at their pain. They don't want to look at what's underneath. They just want to distract themselves. Give me a movie, give me drugs, give me alcohol, whatever it is. I just don't want to go there. And I know that's been true for me personally in many areas of my life where, I wouldn't look at the pain until it caught up and grabbed me by the throat and said, you need to look at this, and that's particularly we talked about young men, young men are not trained in how to handle this. I never got any lessons on how to handle the grief of losing my mother, who I didn't even know was sick, or, it took me 25 years to practice, to deal with that. And I'm lucky. I found a way, I got help, but help is not generally available for that. That's, Gil asked earlier, what are we cultivating? As a culture, we tend to cultivate things that do not, that increase separateness, that increase disconnection, that increase atomization, increase dehumanization. And years ago, I read somebody quoting this, say that strictly speaking, there are no warlike people, but there are warlike leaders. And warlike leaders, as we're seeing right now, cultivate hatred. They cultivate separation. They cultivate demonization. And we know where that goes. We saw that 80 years ago. We saw that ordinary people will press buttons that will drop atomic bombs, and they'll put people in ovens under the right circumstances. Everyone is subject to that, me included. I'm not exempt from that. None of us on this call are. And recognizing that and being willing to look at having the abyss in your soul stare back at you with all of the darkness, with all of the ancient hatreds that have belonged to humanity for as long as humanity's been on the planet, and know that under the right circumstances, it can take you over, and therefore you need to be very vigilant and very willing to look at yourself and say, if that comes along, I would sooner die than act on those impulses. That's a maturation process that we could cultivate. The fact that, quote, modern peoples no longer initiate their children into the wonders of being alive. There is no connection for most people to the earth. And we talk about nature as if it was something separate from us. Rather, Vanessa Andreotti says that humans are an extension of Gaia's body, not the other way around. And that's an incredibly different stance to hold. And when you have that, then you start to weep and mourn for what has been lost of Gaia's body, of the cloak of life that's being unraveled. And when it comes to warriorship, which is not about fighting a war, but rather about how you are in the world filled with different battles. The saying that I really like is, in conflict, you don't bring a knife that cuts, you bring a needle that sews. So what do we do? How do we bring that needle in and sew up what is unraveling and reweave what is unraveling? And grief has a really big part in that, because I mentioned last week about the tears. Certain kinds of tears prevent you from being ripped apart when large, painful things are moving through you. We've got really big, large, painful things as societies to atone for, to make amends for. And it's not going to happen from individuals going through it alone. It's going to happen from people coming together and saying, we got to face this. And that which we don't learn through comedy, we learn through tragedy. Looking at all the disasters occurring, sooner or later, people are going to recognize, you know what? There's no them, there's only us, and we need each other if we're going to get through this. And that'll be a different kind of grief. And that'll be the kind of grief that takes us out the other side into some kind of joy. But there'll be tremendous grieving for what's been lost along the way, and that will never be replaced. So those are some of my thoughts on societal or social or larger scales of grief than just dealing with your own individual pain.
Thank you, Ken. Kent, did you want to jump in for a moment before we wrap up?
Hank?
Hank?
Yeah, well, it's hard to say anything after
Yeah.
beautiful words of Ken. You had asked the question, would we want to come back to this topic after a couple of months? And I was going to say, especially if people can bring examples of how individuals, communities, and countries are able to deal with their grief and change their inner climates.
Agreed. I like that. Thank you. Stacey?
Yeah, I just want to say real quickly that on my call on Monday, this coming up at 1 o'clock Eastern time, I'd like to pick up from what Ken was saying and maybe bring that needle and focus on the young MAGA type boys or whatever. So I hope that some of you will be able to come, because I'd really like to have your input, but I want to continue this conversation.
Cool. Ken, hast thou a poem?
It's not a poem, but I thought I would read a few excerpts, not the whole thing because it's very long, a few excerpts from Chief Seattle's speech. Is everybody familiar with Chief Seattle's speech? Anybody not heard of this before? There are a couple different versions, but just a few things I copied out. I do not know. Our ways are different from your ways. The sight of your cities pains the eyes of the red man, but perhaps it is because the red man is a savage and does not understand. There is no quiet place in the white man's cities, no place to hear the unfurling of the leaves in spring or the rustle of the insect's wings. But perhaps it is because I am a savage and I do not understand. The clatter only seems to insult the ears. And what is there to life if a man cannot hear the lonely cry of the whippoorwill or the arguments of the frogs around a pond at night? I am a red man and I do not understand. The Indian prefers the soft sound of the wind darting over the face of a pond and the smell of the wind itself, cleansed by a midday rain or scented with pinyon pine. The air is precious to the red man, for all things share the same breath. The beast, the tree, the man, they all share the same breath. The white man does not seem to notice the air he breathes. Like a man dying for many days, he is numb to the stench. But if we sell our land, you must remember that the air is precious to us, that the air shares its spirit with all the life it supports. The wind that gave our grandfather his first breath also receives his last sigh. And the wind must also give our children the spirit of life. And if we sell our land, you must keep it apart and sacred, as a place where even the white man can go to taste the wind that is sweetened by the meadow's flowers. To us, the ashes of our ancestors are sacred, and their resting place is hallowed ground. You wander far from the graves of your ancestors, and seemingly without regret. Your religion was written upon tablets of stone by the iron finger of your God, so you could not forget. The red man could never comprehend or remember it. Our religion is the traditions of our ancestors, the dreams of our elders, given to them in solemn hours of the night by the Great Spirit, and the visions of our sachems, and it is written in the hearts of our people. Your dead cease to love you and the land as soon as their nativity and the land of their nativity, as soon as they pass the portals of the tomb and wander away beyond the stars. They are soon forgotten and never return. Our dead never forget this beautiful world that gave them being. They still love its verdant valleys, its murmuring rivers, its magnificent mountains, sequestered vales, and verdant-lined lakes and bays, and ever yearn in tender, fond affection over the lonely-hearted living, and often return from the happy hunting ground to visit, guide, console, and comfort them. We will ponder your proposition, and when we decide, we will let you know. But should we accept it, I, here and now, make this condition that we will not be denied the privilege, without molestation, of visiting at any time the tombs of our ancestors, friends, and children. Every part of this soil is sacred in the estimation of my people. Every hillside, every valley, every plain, every grove has been hallowed by some sad or happy event in days long vanished. Even the rocks, which seem dumb and dead as the swelter in the sun along the science shore, thrill with memories of stirring events connected with the lives of my people, and the very dust upon which you now stand responds more lovingly to their footsteps than to yours, because it is rich with the blood of our ancestors, and our bare feet are conscious of the sympathetic touch. What is a man without the beasts? If all the beasts are gone, men would die from a great loneliness of spirit. For whatever happens to the beast soon happens to man. All things are connected. Let him be just and deal kindly with my people, for the dead are not powerless. Dead, did I say? There is no death. There is only a change of worlds.
Thank you. Thank you all for showing up the way you have. This is beautiful and intense. Off we go into another weekend almost, and August and the rest of our lives. Thank you.
Ciao.